What is going on, everyone? This is Miles Dompier, and today is the big day. Redfall is finally out. After a few delays, after years of anticipation, and after a lengthy hiatus from major first-party AAA exclusives from Xbox, Redfall is officially here. I've spent the last several days playing on Xbox Series X. I got my code late Friday, or I got my code late Thursday, so I didn't really have a chance to do a formal, highly edited video as I typically do, but I wanted to get on stream with you and talk about Redfall because I've spent a lot of time with it. You've seen me tweeting about Redfall. I've tweeted things like, Redfall is one of my most highly anticipated games of 2023. Redfall is going to be one of my most played games of 2023. If you follow me, you know I'm a huge fan of horror games. I'm a huge fan of co-op. So the overall aesthetic and pitch for Redfall, for me, it's what I wanted. I'm a huge co-op fan, a 4-player looter shooter set in a horror universe. Let's go. That seemed like an easy win for Miles Dompier. That sounds like a Miles-ass video game if I've ever heard one. So I was excited. I went into this game incredibly excited. Obviously, we know there's been weird marketing beats leading up to the launch, even dating back to the reveal, where everyone thought this was a Left 4 Dead clone. The marketing cycle for Redfall has been weird, it's been confusing, it's been inconsistent, and then leading up to launch, 2 weeks before launch, we got the bombshell that, oh, by the way, Redfall, the first $70 exclusive on Xbox Series X, is not going to launch with a 60 FPS mode, 30 FPS mode only, 60 FPS to come down the road. For some fans, that was a huge blow. That was a humongous blow to the excitement and momentum. But even me, who went online and complained about 60 FPS, I'm not someone who will skip a game if it's only 30 FPS. I've played plenty of amazing games in 30 FPS, so for me, that's not the deciding factor. 60 FPS always feels better. 100% of the time, 60 FPS feels better to play. That being said, it's not going to stop me from enjoying a game. I played Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Those games were ugly, those games played poorly, but the core experience was compelling enough to keep me going and keep me interested. So, performance and visual fidelity aren't the biggest indicators of a successful game for me. So I want to preface the conversation today with that. And I want to give a huge shout out to everyone who is tuning in live. If you are tuning in live, hit that like button, share it out. We have a lot to cover. Like I said, normally this would be a more edited video, but I really wanted to talk to you all about Redfall as soon as possible because there is a lot that I have to say about Redfall. And again, as I started this video with, I'm a huge fan of horror and co-op, and there were so many things for me that made Redfall a compelling exclusive I couldn't wait to dive into. So, to keep things somewhat organized and to keep myself from rambling too much here, we're going to break down the video into 4 main parts. My initial impressions, basically my first few hours on Xbox Series X, what Redfall gets right, what Redfall gets wrong, and finally, is Redfall really even worth your time? And like I said, I have not finished the game. I am roughly 21 hours into the experience. According to the percentage on my little main menu, I'm about 75% of the way through the main campaign, but I've been going through and replaying the beginning with all of the different characters to get a feel for, are there actually meaningful differences between the 4 characters in this game? Because this is a class-based looter shooter in the vein of a Borderlands, in the vein of, Overwatch is competitive, but still, you have an iconic hero character with special abilities, including an ultimate. So I really wanted to give all of them a fair shake and make sure that, my first run, maybe it was a character I just didn't connect with. So I've tried all 4 characters at this point. So with that being said, I got some gameplay. Got some gameplay on the screen. Everything you see here is captured on Xbox Series X. So all of the footage is captured directly from my experience playing Redfall on Xbox Series X. So let's start with my overall impressions of Redfall when I first opened it up on Xbox Series X. And it really bums me out to say this, but my initial impressions of Redfall were incredibly negative. Really thoroughly unimpressed by the way the game looked and the way the game played. It was honestly jarring when I first grabbed the controller and moved my camera. Again, 60 FPS feels better, but I've played 30 FPS games that look and feel better than Redfall did initially. There's a couple factors for that, and I'll preface this if you guys are going to dive in. Go into the settings. There's an input latency setting in Redfall, which is baffling. So you can go in and you can adjust the input latency. It starts at default. There's a low setting and a high setting. Switch that to low as soon as possible. I don't know why you'd ever want to make more input delay for yourself, but that is an option. But immediately, that is the first thing you need to do, is go into the menu and do the input latency control to low, because that will dramatically improve the feel of this game if you're playing on a console, if you're playing on Xbox Series X, or if you're playing on a controller. Another setting that's cranked to the max is motion blur. And I will say, I usually play with motion blur on. I know that's a controversial thing to say. I know not everyone loves motion blur, but I typically play games with motion blur on because I like the realism of, when you move your head in real life, your peripheral vision blurs. And that, for me, I like it. That being said, there's 3 options: low, medium, and high. It's set to high with obvious, tangible input delay from the default setting. So when you first go to move the camera, it feels slow. It feels like you're leaning into it, and it just really dampens the overall experience of Redfall straight out of the gate. So I went in, changed those settings immediately, and instantly things felt better. Things felt and looked better. As you can see by the gameplay that we're showing here and some of the gameplay that you've seen online, and as we have this conversation today, I want to be very careful with how I phrase everything, how I discuss this, because my least favorite thing in the world is to come on a video or go on a stream and just clown on a game or dunk on a game, dunk on the developers. That is one of my least favorite things in the world to do. So when I talk about all of the criticisms and complaints here, just know that this is coming from the perspective of someone who went into Redfall wanting to love Redfall. That's how I entered this experience. I wasn't pessimistic on Arkane. I wasn't pessimistic on Xbox delivering. I was excited and ready for this experience. It doesn't look very good either. And again, I'm not a graphics snob. I've just talked about playing Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. I'm willing to play an ugly game. It's not the biggest issue for me. But that being said, with this being the $70 tentpole, and with this leveraging the power of the Xbox Series X, all those boring marketing points we're kind of sick of hearing at this point, I was a little taken aback by how unimpressive some of the visuals are. There are gorgeous set pieces. We're going to talk about what Redfall gets right in a minute, but these are my overall initial impressions on Xbox Series X. I'm a console heathen. I could have played this on PC. I have a decent gaming PC, but I prefer to play on console. I've heard, better things about the performance on PC. Some framiness and some pacing issues, but for the most part, if you have a capable PC, you can get 60 FPS, but I knew going into Redfall on Xbox Series X, it was only going to be 30 FPS. I was hoping that meant it was a locked 30 FPS, but it is not. It is absolutely not a locked 30 FPS, and there are moments where there are humongous dips that you feel, and that is a huge bummer. For the most part, I would say about 85% of the time it's locked. So it is fairly consistent, but a bulk of this game involves executing vampires. You have to stake them through the heart to kill them, and there are specific variants. There's a shroud variant and an angler variant that have a lot of particle effects, and so when you go to do an execution on them, the game drops just dramatically. You feel it. It feels like it's going in slow motion, and that is a huge bummer. Whenever you shotgun or shoot an enemy close range and you get the particle effects, you see the shells bounce, oof, the game hitches, you feel it. And there's this just chug to the frame pacing. And that's, again, not the end-all be-all of an experience for me. We're talking about, initial impressions here, about the technical aspects of it. I don't think that's the end-all be-all of a game. And there have been examples of games that have performance problems and do everything else right. And that's not what Redfall is. Redfall isn't a game where it's only the performance problems and everything else is stellar, rock solid. There's a lot of fundamental problems with the loop of Redfall. But before I get into all of that, I do want to talk about what Redfall gets right. Because there are a lot of things that Redfall gets right in my eyes. The environments are really impressive some of the times in terms of the style. I love that they captured the 80s essence, or the essence of 80s horror, I should say. And there are really standout set pieces and moments that, if you've played previous Arkane games, they've kind of been known for. You have some of the most impressive visual sequences I've ever seen in a game occasionally. The opening sequence when you see the waves wrapping around and cascading the sun. There's beautiful standout moments. So overall, I really love the world of Redfall. And that is a huge component of delivering an open world game. So that is a big benefit for me. That's a big positive, is there were plenty of iconic moments and landmarks that made me interested in seeing what else this world had to offer. I'm going to avoid spoilers as I go through this here, so I'm not going to talk about any of the main narrative beats or spoil any big moments for the folks who are interested, but there is a really compelling narrative once you get deeper. It takes a little bit to get going, I would say. The first few hours are very, very slow, but once you start doing some of the bosses and fighting some of the vampire gods, those quests are really interesting and really well designed. There's one in particular where you basically shrink yourself down inside of, and go inside of a dollhouse. And there's all of these weird otherworldly moments that happen in Redfall where you're transported to a psychic dimension, and it feels very much like the Stranger Things, the Upside Down, as we saw in the trailers. Those were the moments that really piqued my interest when they were showing off Redfall. Is, what does this world look like? What is this mystery? What's this overarching story? Why do the vampires exist here? And for those of you who don't know what the overall premise of Redfall is, basically there are vampires that take over Redfall, Massachusetts, and much like Midnight Mass, they're on an island, and the vampires lift the water so the boats can't leave. Nobody can get in or out. So all of these survivors and all of these heroes are trapped on this island, and they're trying to fight back against these vampires that have overrun. So in typical Arkane fashion, if you do like the narrative beats, there is a story that's worth experiencing. Again, I haven't seen it through, so I can't tell you that there's a great payoff, and I unfortunately have to caveat that by saying that you need to play for 10 hours probably before it starts to get good, and that's going to be, I think, a turnoff for some players. But if you're willing to invest in it, there are some really standout quests and some really great moments that have, pulled me in. So that's another big thing for me. So incredible environments, some great narrative beats, and there is an overall. I have to be careful how I word this here. There is something to be said about the way that the classes play out. Like, everyone's kit of abilities is really satisfying, is really fun. I played most of my time with Dev, but like I said, I've played all of the characters. Everyone has some moment or some standout ability in their kit that keeps things fresh, keeps things interesting, and I really like that. But as you get deeper, you realize that what you experience very early on is it. That's the depth of the experience, and that's going to be, a bummer for people who have played stuff like Borderlands or Diablo or Destiny or any other noteworthy looter shooter. You have a loop to look forward to. You have a sense of progression to look forward to, and Redfall doesn't hit that. It doesn't deliver on that. So yeah. Sorry, I'm thinking that might be it for the stuff I like about Redfall. I have played a little bit of co-op, and I have to, and again, I guess I'll caveat this entire conversation with, I haven't played this game with my core group of friends. I have played this game in co-op with people who are also doing, part of the review embargo and part of the review process, but I haven't sat down with the homies, with the core 4-man squad, and really gotten my hands on it. So that's going to be, for me, the true indicator. If me and my friends can dive in, have some fun, laugh at some of the ragdoll, laugh at some of the explosions, laugh at the physics, that's going to really elevate the game for me. I know not everyone's experiencing the game that way. Some people are experiencing this game in a single-player setting, and that's the way I experience most of it. One thing I will say about the solo experience versus co-op is that the solo experience feels way more like a horror game. There are legitimately tense moments where you're kind of watching your back. You're listening to the vampires whisper through the walls. You flick your flashlight on in a pitch black room, and that's all you see. That's the only thing that's illuminated is where your flashlight is. And so when you play solo, it really does feel like a horror game, and I think that is really impressive. So I did thoroughly enjoy that aspect of the single player experience. Obviously, co-op, for me, is more fun. It's definitely more fun. But that being said, if you are playing this solo, you can still enjoy it solo, and it doesn't feel like it's necessarily lacking. Okay, so the third part of this video is what Redfall gets wrong. And again, this is tough for me because it's a huge bummer, because I went into this game wanting to really like it. I went into this game excited, thoroughly excited. And you know I'm a huge horror fan. You know I'm a huge co-op fan. So it really bummed me out that Redfall missed on so many levels. The biggest criminal offense of Redfall is that the open world is not interesting to explore in terms of reward. There's not a lot of incentive to go explore or loot in a looter shooter. There's a lot of different objects. You can loot pretty much everything you see on a counter, from food to wrenches to bleach bottles, etc. But they don't translate to anything. All of that is converted into one particular currency, and that currency can be used to buy everything. So there's no upgrade process for your weapons. You break down your weapons into the same currency. All of the objects you pick up turn into the same currency, and there's like 6 things that you can buy. So the overall loop, the core gameplay loop of this looter shooter doesn't deliver even what Borderlands 1 delivered. And that's, again, the biggest offense of Redfall is that it feels worse than Borderlands 1. It feels worse than Far Cry 3 in so many ways, even though those are the obvious inspirations for what this is. Again, I like the environments. I like the setting. It's just, it's really disappointing that the overall moment-to-moment gameplay and core loop is so far behind, considering it's been so long since we've had those games. I think, in theory, in principle, Redfall is a great idea. I know some people don't like the idea of co-op looter shooters in general, and it's kind of dated, but on paper, I think Redfall is an incredible idea. There's a lot to it that could be exceptional, could make it a really standout hit. The moments when you execute a vampire for the first time and you get this visual flourish and you get this moment you've never seen anything like that in a game before. Moments like that are here, and they keep you invested and they keep you excited. But then you explore 4 houses or 4 giant buildings back to back to back, and you get nothing. I went to 4 houses in a row. There wasn't even a single enemy in 4 houses. And that's when you're building an open world game, that can't be it. There needs to be a sense of reward and wonder around every single corner, and Redfall does not do that. It doesn't. We look at prime examples, and again, these are games that people consider the best games of all time. Breath of the Wild, Elden Ring, where you see something in the distance and you go there, and it's this adventure, this sense of wonder, and when you get there, there's usually something cool, whether it's a loot or an enemy or something exciting. But in Redfall, you see something cool in the distance, you get there, and there's nothing there. There's no reason to be there. And so, if you're playing this game, I would say make sure you're doing quests. Just always have some sort of quest queued up, whether it's a side quest, whether it's a main quest, because a lot of the big set pieces, a lot of the big set piece moments, from the museum to a hospital to all these other places, they are tied to quests. So they're designed to have a quest there. So when you enter them, you can go everywhere inside of this building, but there's no reason to be there unless it's part of a quest. So again, that's kind of a huge bummer for an open world game. So when you're exploring this world, I would say just have a quest active, because it'll save you a lot of time. Because I found myself just wasting a lot of time wandering around the open world. And that's, for me, I love to play games that way. I love that sense of discovery. I love, not having a waypoint and just walking out into the wild and seeing what I discover. And Redfall doesn't reward that. Redfall really does not reward that at all. So the core loop doesn't really evolve. There's only, I would say, 12 weapons total in the game. And when you get the different rarity, there's different modifiers and stuff that slightly alter how the weapon works. But for the most part, you're using the same weapons over and over. Once you get a legendary, you'll use that legendary for the entire time until you find another legendary. And there's only a handful of legendary weapons that I've seen in the game of all of the different class types. And the loot component of the looter shooter isn't interesting. It's very, very limited, very basic in terms of the way it plays out, in terms of what you can find. And yeah, it's, as I touched on with the skills. So you have a limited game, you have a limited loop in terms of gear. There's no gear for your body outside of cosmetics, which is fine. I don't think gear games always need to be super overly complicated and have a bunch of numbers for the sake of numbers. So I don't mind that there's no gear for your body, that it is just cosmetic. That's fun. You get some wolf outfits, you get some new, you get a beard, whatever it is. You get some stuff to customize your character a little bit, and I thought that was neat. But you combine the uninteresting loot with the fact that the overall classes don't develop that much. After about 2.5 hours, when you've unlocked your ultimate ability, you've gotten to level 5, you've seen basically that's it. You've seen your entire kit 2 hours into this game. And there are modifiers that change the way they work. Sometimes they'll add a heal, or sometimes they'll increase the damage you do. The typical meta stuff you see in a looter shooter. But fundamentally, it doesn't change how you play that class at all. And that is, again, we've seen so many examples of games that have done it right and done it well. For Redfall to come out this late in the game and really miss the mark it's really, really disappointing. Another big thing for me is lacks enemy variety. There's a severe lack of enemy variety. There are cool moments where you have epic boss fights, and that, again, rekindles your interest, keeps you excited. But then again, you realize after 2 hours that you've seen almost all the enemies in the game. The game, it's been a roller coaster. It's been a roller coaster for me, because initially I was really down on it. First 2 hours of this game, I said to myself, I don't like this. This is not a game that I enjoy. This is not a game I think I can enjoy. So initially I was very low, and then I had a couple cool quests that pulled me back in, kept me excited, and I was like, yeah, all right, maybe that was just a rough start. Maybe in Arkane fashion, it starts a little bit slow and you have to kind of get over that hump. And then 10 hours hit, and I'm like, I've seen it. I've seen everything. I've seen all of the I've seen all of the gear. I've seen all of my abilities. I've seen everything I can do. And then you realize that that's kind of it. There are some cool quests, but in terms of progression, in terms of that power fantasy, that sense of growth, you peak pretty early on in this. So yeah, it's a map game. If you've played things like Far Cry, it is very much that. I fundamentally don't have a huge problem with map games, but for some people, that's going to be an issue. You have safe houses, you go to the safe house, you do a couple quests, you defeat like a little mini boss in that neighborhood, and you've claimed the neighborhood. But those safe houses are so uninspired. They are so uninteresting. Halo Infinite got a lot of flack for becoming a map game, but when you do a siege or a stronghold, you have the epic moment, you have this sense of power, the sense of obstacle. In Redfall, when you find a safe house in the wild, you walk up and you hold X to turn on a generator. And sometimes if you're lucky, there's 2 enemies guarding it. And that's it. That's the only sense of challenge for taking back a safe house in Redfall. I would say if you want an overall challenge, play the game on the harder difficulty. I played the game on the default difficulty, and it's really easy. There were bosses that I killed in 15 seconds. And that was a little disappointing, because you have this big build up to this epic showdown, and then I bust out my legendary shotgun, and it's gone before they even finishes dialogue. And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, I guess I'll move on. So it's easy. It's definitely easy across the board, which is fine. I don't think that's necessarily a problem. But if you want more of a tactical challenge, I would say bump up the difficulty. I'm a run and gun guy, as you've seen by most of the gameplay here on the screen. I'm all about that shoddy. Just give me that shoddy and let me get in there. So it does that well enough. It's got the slide. It's got some traversal. It's got some momentum. So if you are a run and gun player like me, you can get in there and just wreck some vampires, which is fun. There are moments where it felt really great to play. But there are so many things against this game that I guess segues into our final section of the show, and that's, is Redfall worth your time? And that's a big question, because this game is launching in Xbox Game Pass. So a lot of people are going to say, yeah, I'm just going to check it out. I'm just going to check it out via Xbox Game Pass, because the only investment that I need to spend is my time and the download. And I would highly recommend it. I would say it's definitely worth checking out, diving in if you are a fan of co-op looter shooters. If you're a fan of horror games in general, there are some standout moments and some nods to horror legends and horror icons. So for me, as a horror nerd, I loved seeing that. There's an interesting sense of narrative. But Big but, most of the narrative is told through audio logs, and it is told through text logs. And if you are playing with 4 people, that won't matter. That is one of the worst vessels for telling a story in a co-op centric game, because your homies, chances are, aren't going to sit there and let you read a 500 word document while they're looting. So that's going to be a problem for some people, the disconnect between your friend group, where you have one person who just wants to run through, then you have the other person who wants to engage in the lore, and there are standard set narrative beats that happen in a quest format where everyone playing would enjoy it at the same time, and those are great. They are just few and far between compared to the audio logs, compared to the text logs that give you the context for the world, give you the context for what's happening, why you're there. So that's going to be a huge disconnect. So there's a lot. The problem with Redfall, I mean, I guess I've listed plenty of problems with Redfall, but the biggest hurdle Redfall is going to have right now is that it's coming out next to so many big games. It's got Star Wars just dropped. We have Tears of the Kingdom right around the corner. We have Diablo right around the corner. And a lot of people were talking about, shouldn't you delay Redfall? And one thing that I can say with a extreme level of confidence is that Redfall lacks an overall sense of polish in so many key areas. The story beats, they are slideshows. The story beats are 3D models, they rendered a scene with all of the characters standing there with their 3D models, and they slowly pan and then fade to black, do another one, fade to black. There's a moment in this game where you collect a film canister and you put it in at a movie theater to get this inside story about what's happening in the narrative. And even the film reel that you find in this world and play on a movie theater is a slideshow. And again, little things like that, isolated, aren't an issue. But Redfall is element after element coming together that tells me that this was not ready to go. The Xbox Series X version is so disappointing. It's doesn't look that great. It doesn't run very well. There's nothing exceptionally stand out about the Xbox Series X version of the game. You combine that with the fact that there aren't even executions for a game that has an option to be stealth-centric. There is a sniper who has a cloak ability in this game who turns invisible. And there isn't an execution when you walk up and hit them in the back. All you do is you do an elbow and they kind of just ragdoll and fall over. If you've been watching the video, there is a segment that I highlight that there. There's been a lot of bugs. There's been vampires halfway through the floor. There's been vampires walking in the sky. There's been a lot of technical problems. There's been objects that are invisible. I've had a few quests where it's like, pick up this thing. And I'm like, it's not here. But it won't let me progress. There's no marker on my screen for where it is. So I had to run around the room and smash X until I picked up whatever it is it wanted me to pick up. So it's just lacking a genuine sense of polish across the board. And it's a huge bummer. It's just, again, I went into Redfall incredibly excited, incredibly eager to dive into this world. And just initial impressions. I want to hear from you if you've played it or are going to be playing it. If you're watching this after the fact, or if you're coming back to this video after you play it, please let me know what you think about the first few hours of the game, because I think it makes one of the worst impressions I can think of in recent memory for a AAA game, especially one that's launching in Game Pass. And you can say, oh, well, it's launching in Game Pass, so it doesn't matter as much. That's true, but we also have to factor in the fact that the opposite is true. That means more people are going to be playing this game. That means more people are going to have less of a financial incentive to stick with this game. So I think there's a genuine possibility that a huge number of people play this game and bounce instantly. It doesn't make a great first impression. It doesn't at all. It's a very disappointing introduction to the game, especially if you're a console player. And that's the biggest problem for a lot of people who are going to be playing this on Game Pass, is a lot of them spent $500 on an Xbox Series X, and they want to see that power and that investment showcased. And Redfall, as the first $70 Xbox game, it's not it. It just isn't. And it sets a weird precedent for Microsoft moving forward that, hey, we're going to be charging you $70 kind of for less, because we're not giving you the 60 FPS mode at launch. We don't know what the reality is behind the scenes there, so that's tough. Game development is tough. I've seen people be very harsh on this game, very harsh on this team. And that sucks for them because the lead up to this launch has just been messy. As we've, as the kids say, it's been a messy one. It's just been drama and headline after drama and headline, and nothing has been that positive for Redfall. The previews seemed positive, and that kind of rekindled a lot of hope for people that, hey, maybe despite some of the weird marketing beats, maybe despite the 30 FPS thing, it's going to be fun. We're still going to have a good time because it seems like there's something to enjoy there. And I will say that I am enjoying the game. I do plan to see it through. There are moments where I am genuinely having fun, so it's not, I'm not going to sit here and say it's a bad game. I'm going to just boil the entire conversation down to one word because that's a disservice to what the team built here, because there's a lot of things that are worth celebrating and there are a lot of standout moments. So if you have a good group of friends, if you're in the mood for a looter shooter and you're not inundated with everything else that's coming out, everything else that's gonna be out, it's definitely worth checking out. So as we get to the end of this video here, with this being a live video, I want to turn it over to you. If you guys have any specific questions, and I'll skim the chat here to see if there's anything I missed, drop them there, and I'll answer those for you because I wanted to keep this as open and, I guess, free form as I could. Like I said, typically this would be a way more polished, produced thing from me, but I needed to come out and talk about Redfall as soon as possible because the conversations are going to be negative, and there's a genuine possibility that this is the worst reviewed Arkane game and one of the worst reviewed Xbox games in a while, and that's rough. That's tough for fans. That's tough for the platform. It's tough for a lot of people to hear, and all of the criticisms that I levied against this game today came from somebody who was ready to love Redfall, and that says a lot about the overall experience. So let me catch up on the chat here, make sure there's nothing I missed. Appreciate all of you again hanging out. If you had fun, hit that like button, share it out. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel, all that juicy good stuff. Appreciate each and every one of you. Let's see here. Yeah, there's, as you saw earlier on Twitter, there were some leaks of reviews. One of the first reviews that came out was a 4 out of 10, which that seemed really harsh. But again, I'm not at the point where I can put a score on it because I haven't finished the game. But again, I'm not going to fault anyone who's very, very low on this game, because if you don't stick with it, it doesn't reward you. Christopher Davis asks, do you think if they took more time, maybe another 6 months or even a year, it would have turned out better? Yes, 100%. 100% that would be the case, as is the case with most games. But it becomes this internal debate between time and money and resources. And I don't know what the reality is behind the scenes, but I imagine that Arkane knew the state of the game and wanted a little bit more time. I don't know what that looked like, how much more time they wanted, but clearly they had to make the hard decision that said, like, hey, we're not getting more time, so that means we are not shipping the 60 FPS version of the mode at launch because it's just not going to fly. There's other things that we need to polish up and tighten up. But as I said, there is an overall lack of polish across the board, and more time is always better. But I think somebody somewhere said we're not sure that this game is worthy of that time. And that's kind of the hard reality of game development. At a certain point, somebody has to say, we got to get the game out the door. And that sucks. As someone who plays video games for the art of it, who plays video games for the beauty of what these experiences can deliver, and those memories we all have where we play a video game that changes our life forever, like hearing that it came down to a business decision is always disappointing. But at the end of the day, it's not my money that's on the line. So again, from a boring business perspective, I understand that, but I do think more time would have done this game a lot of favors. Joshua B says, do you think the negative reception for a AAA title under Xbox's banner might finally light some fire under Top Brass's pants to get their shh together? I'm trying. This is live, so I have to be very careful with how I word these things. This is a bad look for Xbox. This is a very bad look for Xbox, and it sets a very bad precedent for $70 games on the Xbox platform. It sets a very bad precedent for Xbox acquiring publishers and teams. Again, I'm not saying this just to stoke console war nonsense or be inflammatory, but the promise of Xbox Game Studios and the promise of Microsoft's investments into the games industry was that these teams were going to be able to deliver games better and more efficiently and on a higher level of quality than they ever have before. And we can look at Redfall and say, no, that's not true. That's objectively not true. That is not the reality of Microsoft buying a publisher. And again, I think the hard reality is that if Bethesda was still independent, that Redfall and Starfield would have dropped last year and they would have been in a much worse state. So I do want to give Microsoft some credit because clearly, I shouldn't say clearly, it seems like they were the ones pushing for a delay for Starfield and Redfall because they wanted to ensure some level of quality. And maybe Redfall was just, there was so much fundamentally flawed with it that they had to tighten up what was there and get it out the door. I don't know. I don't know what those conversations were like behind the scenes, but this is not a good look for Xbox. And as their first $70 game, I would have thought, you know, they would have made sure that all of the T's were crossed and the I's were dotted and this thing was just buttoned up and ready to ship. Like I would have bet you $1,000 that this game would have launched with 60 FPS. So as soon as that news broke, I'm an optimistic guy. Generally speaking, I'm very optimistic, but as soon as that news broke, I said, this game's coming in hot. This game is coming in so freaking hot, and that sucks. That really sucks. And then the review code situation. Reviewed code started going out Thursday evening with an embargo on Monday for an open world game. So everyone who had to do a review either had to crunch or do a review in progress, which again shows that the game is coming in incredibly hot. And that's just such a bummer for everyone involved. All the fans, the developers, Xbox, because all of the marketing and energy that went into that release is now going to be spent on just negative PR and people being on social media complaining and sharing out of context clips from the game and clowning on Redfall. And it sucks. It really sucks for the game. Let's see, making sure. Clayton Luan says, Miles, where do you think the game is going from here? Well, there's a season pass type of thing. If you look at the description, all it really promises is 2 additional characters. So they're going to at least be adding new characters to this experience. I hope that they are able to build upon this, because I think the bones of what are there and the world that is there is interesting and it is worth fleshing out. And it could be one of those games where a year from now, 2 years from now, people love it. And like, yes, Redfall is massive. They've added so much stuff. I love Redfall. And there is a legit possibility where we get to that point. But the initial launch, it's going to turn a lot of people off of the experience. The new Lifter asks, do you think leadership at Bethesda could be at fault for this game being rushed? I have plenty of games to play. I'll come back to this one just for the single-player horror. I mean, clearly there wasn't communication. Clearly there wasn't a sense of communication between Xbox and Bethesda. Bethesda has operated independently. I've heard of the way that Arkane operates. I've heard of the way that Bethesda operates, and they have their own means of doing things. They've been doing business for a long time, and so I'm sure some of it is a sense of trust between Xbox and the executive leadership, like Pete Hines over at Bethesda, that says, hey, you're gonna ship this, it's gonna be good. And they're like, yeah, it's gonna be good. We're excited to ship it. And there's that sense of trust. And again, I have no idea. Yeah, I'm not gonna sit here and say, oh, it's Bethesda's fault or it's Xbox's fault or it's Arkane's fault, because I don't know. I don't have all the answers. I don't have the reality of what this is, so I don't really want to casually say, oh, it's this person's fault. This is all Xbox's fault, or this is all Bethesda's fault. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's somebody needs to take the heat, and in this case, it's going to be Xbox. Xbox as the publisher here. Xbox, you know, for being real, Deathloop just launched last year as a PlayStation exclusive that had multiple modes. That was a Game of the Year contender. I know this is a different team. This is Arkane Austin. But that being said, Arkane just delivered what some people consider their best game ever as a PlayStation exclusive. And then on the flip side, you're going to have Redfall, which some people will say is Arkane's worst game ever. And that, if you're Xbox, that's a bad look. I'm sorry. It's very unfortunate. And that's the reality of the launch of Redfall. And it's a bummer. It's a big old bummer. Corey C says if he didn't play it in co-op, this review is irrelevant. Again, this isn't a formal review. This is my impressions of the game. I also have played the game in co-op. I just haven't played the game in full 4-player co-op, which I will be doing later tonight with the core group of friends that I normally play games with. But I did make it a point to get some co-op in to see how it feels playing with somebody else. And like I said earlier in this video, I do think the co-op adds something for me in the way that I like to play a game. Okay, well, thank you all for tuning into this impressions conversation about Redfall. I think I'm going to wrap it up here. Again, check it out. It's on Xbox Game Pass. If you're a subscriber to the service, if you're invested in the platform, check it out. Please let me know what you think. I talked to so many reviewers leading up to the embargo about where they are. I played with different people leading up to the embargo, and people were all over the place. I had some people tell me they love it. I had some people tell me they outright hate this game. And I want to hear from you. So if you are playing this, if you have played it, please let me know how that felt for you in the comments. And with that being said, appreciate each and every one of you. Have a beautiful day. I'll catch you next time. Take care, everybody.